Avery remembered the day the cracks first appeared beneath her feet, spiderwebbing across the once solid ground. She was on the outskirts of the old city, collecting salvageable scraps of metal from a collapsed skyscraper. At first she thought the vibrations were just aftershocks from yet another quake. They had become so common in the past year that people almost treated them like weather patterns, inconvenient but expected. However, these tremors weren't ordinary. The entire planet seemed to shiver as if plagued by a fever. Rumors spread that the planet's core had become infected, which sounded preposterous. How do you infect the very essence of a world? Yet the suspicious discharges of noxious gases bursting from fissures told a different story. Within a month, the quakes grew fiercer, the cracks deeper, and a greenish glow pulsed in the newly formed cavern. Over everything hung a pervasive stench of rot and chemicals, so thick it burned the back of the throat. Eventually, walking on solid ground felt like treading on the surface of a dying beast, an animal whose heart threatened to stop at any moment. Word was that research labs in the capital city had designed a strain of biomechanical virus meant to accelerate planetary regenerative processes for resource extraction. In simpler times, the approach had seemed promising. Harness nature's deep biological potential to grow new ore veins, clean soil pollution, even give the planet a more stable crust. But the data had been manipulated or misread, and the pilot tests went disastrously awry. Instead of healing, the genetic cocktail mutated. It burrowed into the planet's molten heart, releasing toxins that seeped upward through miles of bedrock. The ground itself began to liquefy in certain regions, belching up teal and black sludge that dissolved anything organic in its path. As roiling lakes of nauseating fluid appeared, entire forests withered overnight. Stone structures melted or turned brittle. People who tried walking barefoot outside quickly learned that contact with exposed ground caused sickness, hallucinations, and sometimes bleeding from the extremities. The meltdown was unstoppable, and it spread faster than anyone could have guessed. From her vantage point on a hill of debris, Avery peered out across a landscape that now more closely resembled an open wound. Gaping chasms, smoldering with green phosphorescence, crisscrossed the plains. In the far distance, she could see what was left of the capital. The top stories of buildings poking out of swirling clouds of toxic vapor, many of them now partially collapsed. News broadcasts had gone silent weeks ago, so the only fragment she had came from travelers staggering in from far-flung settlements. The meltdown had consumed roads and farmland, leaving the survivors cratered islands in a sea of corrupted ground. Some villages still had farmland unaffected by the viral corruption, but that luck never lasted long. She'd heard that an enclave of scientists was working in an underground facility, Ground Zero, they called it, the place where the meltdown had first been identified. They were rumored to be searching for a cure. Avery doubted the planet had that long, yet hope was a precious commodity these days, priceless enough to justify a near-suicidal journey. Back at her makeshift camp, Avery rechecked her supplies. She only had enough purified water for 3 days, plus a handful of ration cubes that glowed orange when heated, but tasted like old cardboard. Her best weapon was a battered pulse rifle gleaned from a deserted outpost. It didn't matter. She lacked other choices. The meltdown forced people to become wanderers. No place was safe for long. So the next morning she broke camp and set off, following rumors like breadcrumbs. As she walked, she felt the heat rising from beneath the cracked surface. Poisonous mist hissed each time her boots pressed into the fractured soil. Every step had to be deliberate. One missed footing into a rotting chasm could mean a painful toxic demise. She tried not to think about how the ground wasn't just toxic, it was alive in some horrifying way, as if the virus had become a malignant consciousness lurking beneath the crust. After 3 days of carefully moving at twilight to avoid scorching midday temperatures, Avery discovered a settlement. A ragged sign reading Havencrest hung lopsided above a massive fence made from scavenged metal plates. The outer perimeter looked battered but serviceable. She announced herself through a broken loudspeaker and waited with her pulse rifle at the ready, anticipating hostilities or, worse, infected creatures. The virus sometimes spawned hideously diseased wildlife and animals, with glowing pustules, twisted limbs, snarling madness in their eyes. As the settlement gate rattled open, Avery exhaled. She was greeted by a weary man with a scar running from brow to chin. He introduced himself as Tehran, the self-appointed watch captain in Havencrest. Inside, Avery saw a community on the brink of collapse. Tents lined the outskirts of a modest set of brick buildings. People wore face coverings and coughed whenever the wind changed direction. Dustings of toxic residue drifted down from the swirling clouds overhead. Medical supplies were scarce, so injuries and illnesses lingered. Taryn explained that groups came and went, some lured by rumors of a safe zone near the northern mountains or an underground facility rumored to house a cure. Others simply succumbed to the meltdown. The ragtag group at Havencrest was too weak to travel far, yet too stubborn to abandon what remained of their home. They shared a meal of boiled roots and water that evening, and Avery recounted her plan: to travel to Ground Zero and discover if there was any truth to the rumors of a cure. By the time she finished, half the settlement had gathered in the building's courtyard to hear her story. Some scoffed at the notion. Others gazed at her with a faint spark of hope, as if wanting desperately to believe that rescue might be possible. Then an older woman named Iria spoke up. Iria claimed that in her younger years she'd been a technician at the lab that had tested the virus. She insisted that the meltdown could be reversed if its core mechanism was disabled, but the only place to do that was the site where the virus first broke free, the planetary data hub at Ground Zero. Iria's words wove a hush over the courtyard. No one wanted to volunteer for a suicide mission, but Avery felt a pull, a duty almost, to see this through. A planning session commenced. Taryn insisted on coming, along with a scout named June, who possessed an uncanny skill for navigating meltdown zones. A soft-spoken medic, Dr. Chen, volunteered as well. In the morning, the four of them set out, each carrying gas masks, rations, and protective gear that had been hastily cobbled together. The entire settlement gathered to see them off, and for a moment, Avery imagined that the eyes upon them radiated more than desperation. There was a sense of faith in this leap into the unknown. The first challenge was crossing the Rot Flats, a vast expanse of ground that had liquefied around overgrown industrial complexes. Traveling by daylight was out of the question because the meltdown gases superheated the region, creating pockets of scalding steam that erupted without warning. They moved under the partial cover of night's cooler air, navigating by starlight and a battered handheld device Taryn had managed to procure. June led the way, her eyes scanning every fault line and ripple in the ground. Occasionally, Avery's boot would sink into sludge, pulling at her foot as if the earth wanted to swallow her. Twice, Taryn had to yank her free before the ooze could cling to her legs. Sludge wasn't the only threat. Halfway through the flats, they encountered what had once been a herd of livestock, now mutated by the meltdown. Their hides glowed with a faint bioluminescence, and they wandered aimlessly, drooling toxic mucus from their mouths. As soon as they spotted the travelers, the beasts charged, though it was unclear if they recognized them as food or were simply maddened by infection. Avery and Taryn fired pulse shots, trying to keep distance. The animals' flesh crackled with each impact, and the stench of burning corruption churned Avery's stomach. Eventually, the creatures staggered and fell into a steaming pool of sludge. The party retreated around the brink of that pit, swallowing back nauseated horror. It took them 2 nights to fully cross the Rot Flats, during which they carved out shallow hideouts in the debris for daytime shelter. Sleep was restless and fraught with nightmares. Avery dreamed of the planet itself, screaming in agony through molten veins beneath the ground. In her dreams, she was small, scurrying across the surface of a living creature while toxic fumes spewed from wounds that refused to close. She woke several times coated in sweat, ears ringing. When they finally reached solid earth again, they found a battered sign pointing toward the capital. Rusted letters half chiseled away formed the word Ground Zero, with an arrow that guided them further westward. The air grew thick as they continued, each breath tasting of metal and decaying smog. More frequent quakes shook the ground, forcing them to navigate over newly opened fractures. During one quake, Dr. Chin nearly vanished when a fissure opened under his feet. Only Taryn's quick reflexes saved him, grabbing the medic's outstretched hand. As they went along, they encountered further signs of breakdown. Roads had caved in. Ruined vehicles lay in twisted heaps. More than once they saw the remains of travelers who had fared poorly. Even June's normally stoic facade cracked at times, and she pulled her mask tighter against her face, as if wanting to block out the entire world. Yet they pressed onward, in a silence underlined by shared determination. If the meltdown continued unabated, no one would survive, not on this planet or any of the scattered settlements remaining. Their only chance was to try to sever the virus's hold, or at least discover if that was still possible. On the 5th day, they arrived at the outskirts of the capital. The city looked more like a graveyard than a center of civilization. Skyscrapers listed precariously, some fully collapsed into fiery sinkholes. The once bustling streets were deserted except for swirls of greenish smog. Sporadic bursts of flickering neon came from short-circuited billboards that still blinked lights across broken windows and shattered concrete. A grand welcome sign announced, "We build the future," in ghostly red letters, ironically highlighting the ruin that lay beyond it. Avery felt a lump rise in her throat, remembering how as a child she'd visited the city with her parents, dazzled by the hustle and grandeur. Navigating the capital was a laborious process. They hopscotched from fallen slabs of pavement to half-intact sidewalks, constantly on guard against sinkholes or crumbling rubble. Twice they were forced to climb over husks of vehicles, plugged nose to tail in a jam that must have occurred when the meltdown began in earnest. Many of the vehicles had caked residue inside, testament to the toxic meltdown's effect on people. Avery shuddered to imagine the chaos, the panic, the final frantic attempts to flee. She found herself wondering, had the meltdown claimed everyone here in an instant, or had some hidden pockets survived, barricaded in basements or tall towers? Eventually, they stood before a massive, reinforced structure that Iria's map had marked as the original research lab. The exterior was scarred by multiple fires, its reinforced glass windows half broken. Of the main entrance, a large circular logo had partially melted off, leaving only a jagged shape. The quake-scarred sidewalks here were riddled with piping and cables snaking in and out of the building. Tehran stepped forward, forcing the sealed door open with a pry bar. It screeched as it gave way, the sound echoing ominously in the gloom inside. The first floor was covered in dust and debris. Broken lab equipment lay scattered across the corridors. Old charts plastered the walls, some in foreign scientific scripts, others showing early concept designs for the virus project. One large poster read, "Advance Tomorrow's Technology, Harness Nature's Potential," accompanied by smiling scientists. Soot covered the poster's bottom half, as though someone had burned it in anger or desperation. They found a set of emergency stairs descending deeper into the complex, since Ground Zero's facility was mostly subterranean. The deeper they went, the higher the ambient temperature rose. The walls grew slick with condensation. Their boots splashed through shallow puddles of chemical runoff. Despite the suffocating heat, Avery felt a chill tightening in her chest. The meltdown's epicenter was close. Dr. Chin suggested they move slowly, scanning the environment with Geiger counters and biosensors to monitor the meltdown's toxicity levels. The results were alarming. The numbers spiked off the scale, indicating that the meltdown was near catastrophic. Tehran grimly concluded that even their protective suits might not be enough if they lingered too long. On the final sub-level, they came upon an enormous underground chamber. A gaping crack split the floor, revealing a direct view down into the planetary crust. Green and black sludge bubbled and churned, radiating an eerie fluorescence in the darkness. The entire cavern felt alive, throbbing with a slow, pulsing heartbeat. This was it, the place where the virus had fused with the planet's molten heart. Networks of twisted cables and dislodged machinery dangled over the chasm, remnants of the original experiment. The group spread out along the chamber's perimeter, searching for the main data console or any operational system that might be used to disrupt this abomination. They quickly found the remains of the main control station, caked in dried sludge. Most of the screens were shattered, but a single console still blinked fitfully. Avery and Dr. Chen powered it up with a portable energy cell. The screen fuzzed, then displayed a labyrinth of code and error messages. Even in disarray, some data logs survived. Reading through them, it was clear that the experiment had been intended to bind a custom-cated virus to the planet's regenerative processes. Instead, the virus had multiplied uncontrollably in the superheated environment, rewriting the planet's geological structures. The meltdown was, in a horrific sense, the planet's entire crust disintegrating from the inside out. A final log claimed that the meltdown's central host was located at the base of this chamber. If that host was destroyed or sterilized, the virus would lose its anchor to the planet's core. The meltdown would still leave devastation behind, but further spread might be halted, possibly leaving the planet a slim chance to heal over centuries. "How do we destroy the host?" Avery asked, eyeing the console. Everything pointed to a dangerously direct approach: physically sever the virus. The logs referenced a specialized meltdown disruptor stored in the lab's upper levels. The device used an intense sonic wave that could destabilize the virus's protein structure. But from the logs it appeared the disruptor required a direct vantage into the planet's core to deliver the effect. Terran stared at the seething chasm, shadows flickering across his features. "So, we set it off right here," he said, a wry smile crossing his lips. "At Ground Zero." June left to search the upper levels for the disruptor. She returned an hour later, battered but triumphant, dragging a heavy cylindrical device with a portable generator. Its plating was cracked in places, yet it looked serviceable. She'd also come across a pack of old oxygen canisters, likely meant for short-term emergencies, and grabbed them in case the chamber's fumes overwhelmed them. The plan was straightforward and terrifying. They would position the disruptor near the lip of the chasm, calibrate it using the console, and fire a sonic pulse that would reverberate through the molten fissure, targeting the virus's structure. According to the logs, the meltdown would intensify briefly before it was halted, and they'd need to evacuate quickly if the cavern became unstable. Dr. Chen wired the disruptor to the console with trembling hands. Terran and Avery located sturdy support columns on the chamber's edge from which they could anchor themselves if a quake hit. June served as lookout, monitoring the swirling gases for signs of sudden toxicity spikes. The moments ticked by in near silence as Dr. Chen input the final commands. In the background, the planet's infected underside bubbled and churned, as if sensing its imminent confrontation. Dark fumes rose in sporadic bursts. When the disruptor powered up, the chamber was filled with an electric hum that made Avery's teeth ache. She heard Dr. Chen mutter a quick prayer before pressing the firing switch. Everything happened at once. A piercing tone tore through the cavern, quickly escalating from a sharp whine to an ear-splitting shriek. Clouds of green coolant sprayed from the device's vents, and the floor started trembling. Through the swirling vapor, Avery glimpsed the chasm's contents roiling in violent upheaval, glowing with that awful toxic luminescence. Waves of heat smacked them full force. She heard Terran shouting for them to brace themselves. The entire subterranean complex shook with the fury of an earthquake. Chunks of concrete and twisted metal crashed from the ceiling. One boulder-sized piece nearly crushed June, but she dove clear at the last second. Rancid fumes rose, forcing Avery to clamp a fresh oxygen mask over her face. Light flickered and died. Then, with a final ear-splitting crack, a deafening vacuum swallowed all other sound. The meltdown seemed to recoil, the swirling green sludge draining downward into deeper cavities of the planet, as though the virus's hold was breaking. Terran clung to a support beam with white-knuckled hands, shouting something inaudible. Dr. Chen, his eyes wide with adrenaline, managed to keep the disruptor active for another brutal minute. Then a final quake knocked the device loose, sending it plunging into the chasm. A flash of green light followed as the meltdown fluid seethed. A wave of smoky heat burst upward, nearly blasting Avery off her feet. Slowly, the trembling subsided. The sludge's glow diminished, though occasional flickers of energy still crackled through. Something had changed in the air. It wasn't exactly clean, but the rancid stench of unstoppable corruption was replaced by a stale dryness, as if the meltdown had lost its fierce momentum. Dr. Chen collapsed to his knees, chest heaving. Terran pulled him upright, and they all stared into the pit. To Avery's disbelief, the meltdown had receded to half its previous level. The virus still lurked, but it no longer convulsed with the same malignant intensity. "How quickly will it spread again?" June asked, her voice echoing in the cavernous hush. Dr. Chen shook his head, unsure. The meltdown might smolder for years, but without the host in full control, it won't keep poisoning the surroundings at this rate. We've bought time. Avery peered over the edge and saw new fractures in the planet's crust, as if the meltdown had turned inward on itself. Perhaps the planet might stand a chance to stabilize someday. Their respite was short-lived. Hundreds of cracks still lined these corridors, and the entire facility had been weakened by the final quake. It would collapse given enough time, so they had to move. The group scrambled back through the labyrinth of shifting halls, at times wading through knee-deep water and sludge. June used her scouting instincts to find a safe path, but the aftershocks were relentless. One corridor collapsed behind them, sending up a choking cloud of debris that stung their eyes. By the time they found the emergency stairwell leading to the surface, they were all coughing, panting, and half-blind. They emerged, blinking into the ruinous sunlight, which shone through a haze of greenish smog. For one terrifying moment, Avery thought the meltdown had erupted again. Then she realized that the haze wasn't thickening, only drifting in a swirl as it always had. She, Tehran, June, and Dr. Chen limped clear of the building. A sudden wave of exhaustion hit them. They dropped to their knees, gazing out at the battered city. It stayed still. The ground no longer rumbled with the same catastrophic menace. Instead, a shaky tranquility settled in. They wasted no time leaving the capital's heart. The meltdown's presence lingered, but in the coming days it might recede enough for pockets of land to be reclaimed. As they took a moment to rest, Avery caught Tehran's eye. He gave a small, tired grin. In that fleeting exchange, they silently acknowledged what they had accomplished. The unstoppable meltdown had, at least for now, been halted. The planet might survive, or it might not. But because of their actions, there was a future where survival was possible. On the unsteady trek back to Haven Crest, they discovered subtle signs of relief in the environment. The cracks still existed, and long stretches of land still exhaled faintly toxic fumes, but the paralyzing intensity seemed less. Some of the sludge pools appeared inert. Rotting trees held onto their last withered leaves, and an uncanny hush replaced the howling storms of toxic wind. It was as if the planet was taking one ragged, hopeful breath. When the quartet returned to Havencrest gates, battered and filthy, the settlement's people rushed forward in alarm, certain that the travelers had failed or been pursued by meltdown monstrosities. Yet the expression shifted from dread to astonished joy when Tehran explained what they had done at Ground Zero. It didn't mean the meltdown had vanished. Everyone there knew the planet was scarred beyond recognition, but the unstoppable tide had been slowed. Iria wept openly, gratitude and relief written in the deep lines of her face. People began speaking of cleaning the soil at the settlement's perimeter, fortifying the water purifiers, maybe even planting new seeds if they could procure hardy enough strains. Late that night, Avery stood at Havencrest's makeshift watchtower. She stared across the moonlit horizon, where the ground's cracks glowed faintly with leftover toxic light. In the distance, the capital was still visible, broken silhouettes of towers against the starry sky. For the first time in months, the night didn't feel like the prelude to further devastation. She knew the planet's recovery could take decades or centuries. Perhaps it was a fool's hope to think it might ever be truly clean again. But no matter how long it took, life had bought itself a chance. The meltdown had met resistance and been forced to concede ground. She turned to see Tehran ascending the ladder to join her. He handed her a cup of stale coffee, an indulgence someone had salvaged from the settlement's meager stores. They sipped in silence, neither speaking the question both felt. Where do they go from here? For Avery, the only real answer was forward. Help the settlement rebuild, work with survivors, ensure that the meltdown never again gained a foothold. If rumors spread of safer land, maybe caravans would gather. Maybe people would retake portions of the planet, bit by painful bit, forging a new normal from the meltdown's ashes. For all that had been lost, some spark of hope remained. And beneath her boots, She could sense the planet's heartbeat, still weak, still uncertain, but no longer racing toward total collapse. As Avery stood watch, she felt quiet determination settle inside her. A final stand had been made at ground zero, and for better or worse, the world's future had bent to the will of a few determined souls who believed that even on a planet infected to its core, there was a reason to fight until the bitter end. Only time would tell whether the planet could heal or if the meltdown would reassert itself. But for this moment, at least, hope was no longer just a rumor. It was alive, pulsing in the living soil beneath them. And on nights like this, that was enough.